Welcome in, everyone. Hello, hello. As you come into the space, maybe arriving in from other meetings, responding to emails, different things, just take a moment just to center yourselves. We've been working on a lot of practices over the last 6 months and just want to invite each person to take a minute or two to do their own breathing, their own grounding, their own somatic practice. Yeah. So for me, that'll look like stretching. And then as we're ready, Reese will open us up.
All right, I think we have the majority of people here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday, Junior, I like to call it. Yes, goodness prepared for it. Before we move in to the flow of today, I want to invite us to take a moment to ground in ourselves, not just in our roles or systems, but in the lives of the youth and families at the heart of our work. As we continue to build a coordinated pathway of care and accountability for youth and families in Oregon, it's essential that we just stay rooted in our shared humility and humanity and purpose, right? So we're just going to go through a short scenario and then spend a few minutes in a couple breakout groups. Denisha, Shannon, or Tashana, if you guys could please put the scenario in the chat. I am going to read it aloud, but in case people forget. And then once I'm finished reading, if you guys could drop the reflection questions. So as I read this prompt, just kind of reflect and hold this in your heart space. If Devon and/or his family were in this meeting right now, what would you want to hear them say or do? So Devon is an 11-year-old in Oregon who initiated harmful sexual behaviors toward his younger siblings. While the impacted children quickly received services through the Children's Advocacy Center, Devon's parents faced repeated delays, dead ends, and conflicting system responses. Despite referrals for therapy, no intake occurred for months. The parents had to research services on their own. Their child welfare worker misunderstood the need for specialized treatment and emphasized family reunification in a way that disregarded safety concerns. Devon eventually reoffended in the home. When the family sought help from juvenile justice, they were told that juvenile justice could not intervene because Devon was under 12. It took over 18 months for Devon to begin appropriate treatment. The family was left feeling isolated, unsupported, and deeply let down by the very systems meant to help them. So again, we're going to just take a moment in our breakout groups with this prompt. While I have several reflection questions for you all, please don't think like the goal is to get through them all. 100%. Great. You guys can pick whichever one resonates or sits with you all the most, or you can get through what you get through. But the reflection questions, I believe there are 4 of them. How might we redesign early responses so families don't have to become the experts or case managers themselves? If Devon and his parents were silently sitting in this meeting today, listening to how we talk, how we plan, how we build, what would you want him to hear us say or do? What policy or coordination gaps are clearly visible in Devon's story? How do we repair trust with families who feel betrayed by the systems meant to help them? All right, so I think, Dr. Niche, how much time are we going to give for the breakout groups?
We can do 10 minutes. Because did you want them to answer all these questions, like as many as they can, or just uplift whichever ones they want to talk through?
The second and the last one. Uplift the
Wonderful.
ones they want to talk through and how many they get through in that time for sure.
Yep, great. So yeah, we'll do about 8.5 minutes by the time they all get to get over there. Breakout groups have started.
Thank you guys. I hope your reflective breakout groups were fruitful. Would anyone just like to share with the larger group?
This is Annalise. I can share quickly. I don't want to take up a
Thanks,
lot of time,
Annalise.
but we're doing the education subgroup and we're getting the our information into the action planning template. So that's our next step. So
Good. I love that. And I love how you brought it all together. That's great. Would anyone else like to share? All right. Well, I just really thank you all for leaning into that reflection. I was seeing a lot of head nodding. And so um, these moments really do like further just help us ground in our why, right? And not get so caught up in the systems because that can be so disheartening, right? So let's just continue to carry this mindset, not just throughout this session, but throughout the home stretch of our journey. We're almost there and we've made tremendous work so far. And I think I'm kicking it off to you, Shannon.
Yeah, we're gonna go back into work groups. When the work group leads met, last week we talked about having actually doing the work group time at the beginning of the call, to be able to kind of like orient, get organized, talk together, give updates, sort of talk through some stuff, and then do have any speakers or any other things do that so you guys and then come back together again as work groups to be able to kind of like process some stuff and also do some report out. So we're flipping the flow today. You might have seen that on the agenda. So we're gonna go back into work groups and so that you all can have some time to kind of check in and as Annalise and the community education group already starting to kind of think about the recommendations for the theory of change and building that out. So we're gonna just immediately go right in and we'll have about 30 minutes for work group time now, and then we'll come back.
Actually, I think we'll have about maybe 25 minutes and then we can bring you back for a 5-minute break. Would that be okay?
Oh, good call.
Yeah.
Okay. Back. Right, we've got Tashana and I had put the agenda and the briefing in the chat. I'm just gonna pull up the agenda and just orient ourselves to the rest of our time. So we're gonna go through some announcements and updates, and also going to do a little bit of talking about our final time together in August, because holy smokes, we only have 2 more of these sort of our traditional sessions together in June and July. And then we have our final in-person session in August. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, have some work group report out, and then we'll hear from the incredible team in New Jersey. And then we'll close out. So that's where we are. As I said, time has flown. And so in your briefing, you'll see that's sort of our additional roadmap that is left is not a lot. So in June, we are going to spend some time talking about kind of the theory of action that will that will sort of bring together all of the recommendations from this work group, and really be talking a bit about sort of logic models and how to best articulate all of the recommendations that we are putting together. And then also particularly thinking about how to bake in certain recommendations that will include sort of ongoing learning, evaluation, iteration, to make them sort of be ones that are not sort of evergreen and stuck, that this is a continuous ongoing process. So I won't be here that day. I have another facilitation that I have to do, and I'm sad I won't be with you all. But my colleague Katie, who is an expert in logic models, theory of change, putting together kind of recommendations, policy recommendations, she is going to come in and help us facilitate for that section. And then we're still hoping to have another guest speaker in that session in June. And then in July, it really is that we're going to have some time to sort of look at those, gather these drafted recommendations to start formulating that final report. And then in August, we have our final committee recommendations for report for the legislature and our closing convening. So with that, we wanted to share with you sort of a draft idea of the flow for the day for that closing convening. And then we also wanted to check with you all about where that should happen. Tashana, can you drop that in the flow for the day in the chat? Thanks. So previously, our first time together in person, we were in Salem. And so I'm going to launch a poll to sort of get feedback from you all on kind of where this should be happening. If you want it in Salem again, if you'd like to be in Portland or somewhere else, if there's somewhere else that we should just drop it in the chat as well. So then the flow for the day is that we would sort of welcome, orient, talk through, have work groups sort of talk about, do their kind of final summary of the recommendations, the narrative, the presentation that, and all the information that would be going to the legislature. We'll have a break, do some roundtable conversations, and then have lunch, and particularly have a community-based organization, maybe have a few of them be able to come up, share, have a little bit of kind of like a fair about resources, and being able to have it sort of be a like community connection, networking. You all do so much of this work together, so wanting to make space for that as our potential flow. Always open to ideas, feedback, whatever you all think would be the best use of that time. So if you have any feedback, you can drop it in the chat or just send us an email if you want to like think on it for a little bit. That's why we're doing this a little early. Though August is both very far away and right around the corner. So if you yeah, something different than Portland or Salem. So but if you have any ideas or thoughts on how to best use that time, please let us know. Yeah, so that's sort of our road ahead, and particularly the like countdown to our final 3 months together. I'm gonna leave the poll open for a little bit because we've got some folks who have not yet answered. Yeah, and then Nish, do you want to touch through the like MDT survey? I can also put it in the chat. Or Tashana, do you have the survey in the chat? Tashana's got the survey in the chat. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Nish.
Yeah, no problem. And to answer your question, Sarah, about mileage hotel, yeah, that is something that's reimbursed. We were told if it's reimbursable through your organizations to do it that way, but if it's not, we do have monies put to the side to be able to cover that. If you could just let us know, that way we can kind of get a head count of who might need that. That would be super helpful on our end as we start to handle all the logistics around booking a venue and all those things.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, regardless of where the event is, if anybody needs mileage or hotel, email Welcome VIP so Tashana can start a running log so we know who those people might be.
Oh, okay.
If it's something you can get reimbursed your jobs, go that way. But if it's not, we have money put to the side to cover, make sure everybody's able to get there. As Shannon said, we're going to talk more about it, next time too. So look over that tentative flow. It's really meant to be like a community engagement day to be able to invite families, youth, community-based orgs, anybody, so that way they can kind of hear the early recommendation report outs and then be able to have that time at tables to be able to talk with you all and offer feedback and suggestions, and then to be able to flip it and learn and hear from them through tablings and things. If there's anything different or something you would like to add, or even something you would like to lead that's within that, please do also email that into us or bring it up the next time. So MDTs, I will, between me and Ronica, because I will share what I know, and that is our Juris Committee has, oh, sorry, polls keep popping up. Our Juris Committee has created an MDT survey and has sent it out already to all of the lead facilitators for the MDTs across the state of Oregon. Some of their early feedback that they had received was that, one, there's a separate committee that has been working on creating standardized processes and protocols for MDTs across the state, and that the best thing was to create a survey so that information could be captured and presented back to the committee. The survey poll closes on, Shannon, correct me, it's either May 9th or May 11th, but somewhere around
May 9th.
May 9th, thank you. And what is getting dropped in the chat is what the survey looks like that's being completed. And the Juris Committee has agreed to share the survey results with us. I will pass it off to Ronica to add any more context about what's happening in the land of MDT coordination right now.
Yeah, thanks, Nish. And I don't have a ton. I know this survey is being kind of compiled by the Juris Committee, along with some feedback from all of the local MDTs about kind of issues, bumps that are happening within the local structures. Shelley with Oregon Child Abuse Solutions that you may be familiar with is providing, she's currently right now on a grant that was given to CAMI to provide additional training and support to MDT members. There's some different versions of multidisciplinary kind of training about forensic child abuse response that's going out over the next year or so, but they've recently got some additional support to help really work on and update the statewide MDT protocol. And every MDT is going to be, they make their modifications for what makes sense for them locally. But some updates are happening to the statewide MDT kind of like draft protocol. And then also some specific work about standardizing and updating CSEC protocols, Carly's protocols, DEC protocols for each of the county teams. That's all I got.
Thank you. So, what we were going to do was, if it's of interest to the committee, do an informational interview with Shelley, just to learn a little bit more about what's been happening. I see some head nods, to be able to offer that up to the committee. And so, Shannon, is that cool if you reach out to Shelley?
Yep. I'll reach out to Shelley. Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll have that available by the end of the month, hopefully based upon scheduling. Okay.
Awesome. All right. Okay. Yes, Jesse, see your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm just a little confused about the community engagement and questions. It feels like at that point we will, I mean, if this is in August, we will essentially have our recommendations pretty well finished. And so if we then we sort of present things and get questions from folks, I guess I'm not understanding kind of what the purpose is, because now everything's pretty much done. And so, I mean, we've been talking about the theory of change and kind of co-creating. We've been bringing people in kind of throughout to make sure that we've got that kind of that voice kind of brought in. So ideally, we've been kind of bringing the voice of the people in to make sure that we've got that as part of our recommendations. And so it feels a little late to then be bringing kind of community voice in at the very end once our recommendations are essentially finalized. So I'm just I don't understand what the purpose is of that last day. I'm just wondering if you could say more.
Yeah, thank you for uplifting the inquiry. Our thought process is that it's more of a final report out to the community. And in reporting out, it's never a closed thing. This is all an iterative process. And so being able to put that into your presentation, right? Like, we've surveyed the community, we've had panels, or we can even put that into an opening, right? Of like, hey, everybody, this is what we've been doing. And the first part would be each of the work groups just kind of presenting out, this is what we have. And if community folks have questions, they're going to be writing them down and we're going to gather them. And then at the roundtable discussions, it's more so to be able to kind of go through those. Like, they might have questions of just, how did you guys come up with that? Or why are you choosing to prioritize this over that? So it's more of an engagement and less of like, we're going to overhaul all these recommendations and make changes. So as a facilitation team, that's how we envisioned having a closure around this. And also, this is just an idea. If there's a different way that the committee would like to utilize the closing convening, this is now, and next month we'll have more concentrated time to bring forth those ideas of how that time can be shaped.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Thank you, Jesse. Any other questions regarding, because I know we wanted to get through updates in 15 minutes, but any other questions regarding what's happening with MDTs, the flow, the tentative flow of the closing convening, or just anything else that was shared? Yeah, Justine.
Yeah. Can folks hear me okay? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Debbie and I are in a room together at a conference, so excuse the echo. I was just curious, Shannon, if you would be willing to share with the big group a little bit of what you shared with the work group leads around kind of the process of kind of creating the recommendations. I found that so helpful, and I know that I won't do as good a job summarizing it as you did. And as we were checking in with our work group, as we think about next steps, I think it would be really helpful maybe to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when we talked in the work group leader check-in, some of our incredible work group leads were like, we're coming up with like a lot of stuff. Like, we got a lot of different recommendations. How are we gonna, like, some of them overlap with each other with like other groups? Like, how are you gonna make it all make sense? And what we're going to do is each work group has their like theory of change sort of template document that's in Dropbox. And you can use that format. You can use whatever format you like, but creating sort of a theory of change for your work group that lists all the recommendations you have. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take each theory of change and we're going to put them all together into a high level theory of change. Theory of change is it's a visual like logic model that shows sort of if we do this, then we expect this to happen, then this, and then these are the like long-term outcomes. So we're gonna, and having it sort of be relatively high level, like we'll make a visual that sort of people can interact with and engage with that's sort of easy. And then there will be a narrative that goes with it that gets a bit more in the weeds about explaining it. And if you all have additional like portions that you want to include of like, well, we have all this extra like research, we want to include a bunch of other like links or other documents, or we sort of, here's like a high level summary sort of narrative that's like 3 or 4 pages, but then we got like 20 more pages of like other stuff that we would want to have like packaged with this. That's totally fine. We're like, so there in the idea that there's like a single source document that will be the perfect thing for everybody. So we just don't follow that. So we're trying to make sort of a few different iterations of it, and that way being able to include all of the additional materials and things like that you all want to. But that sort of each work group's going to make that theory of change for your work group. It's okay if there's stuff on your theory of change that's in another group's theory of change, totally fine. We will bring them together and like map them across each other, and so that there's one solid one that's pretty high level for the whole committee. And then we'll have a narrative that goes with it that goes into more detail. Was that helpful, Justine? I don't know that I said the same thing I said last time, but yeah. Okay.
I think, yeah, it's helpful to hear more.
Cool. Any other questions? Okay, I know Annalise did her sort of report out earlier that like they're working on their theory of change in the community education group. So Annalise, do you have any other share outs that you want to sort of name for the group, or that's it, working on the theory of change?
Yep, that's
Do you have
it.
a
Yep,
timeline of
thanks.
it? Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Good question, Annalise. If we do go with the model for the closing convening as it is, I know that your survey had a list of organizations that are doing this work that were gathered. I think that would be a great starting point of organizations we might want to invite to the closing convening.
Oh,
So-
sure. Yeah, I will definitely, I plan to include that information on that change document. So
Fantastic. Thank you.
yeah, I should have that to you later this afternoon. So
Wonderful.
All right. Yes.
You want us to go?
Yeah, sure.
So we have, ours is a combined. We have essentially behavioral health, mental health, and the community developing. And essentially, we're going to probably schedule one more meeting and then also put together our theory of change document to send to our team and then get feedback and then send to you guys. So I would say within the next, probably by the end of this, wait, what month are we in? Yes, beginning of the month, the latest at the end of this month, probably mid-month, we will be able to have that to you.
Awesome.
And also just, we super appreciate the concise, like this is where we're at. But if folks also want to go over, I know it's in the briefing, but any recommendations that you are all preliminarily seeing that you might want feedback on from the larger group, like this is your time to be able to bring in those those questions or conversations.
We are a few recommendations that I can say. One is we're again recommending that there is a central there's an individual in each community, whether that's they have multiple cities, multiple districts, whatever that looks like, but essentially an individual who understands and knows what's available so people can go to. One is a hub that allows individuals to get access to whatever those resources and things are within the state, because right now people don't know. And then one of the other recommendations is, again, a learning system that allows and educates educators, childcare owners, teachers, anyone who works with families and children, so that they will have a basic understanding of what sexual development is, as well as sexualized behavior, like what to do in those situations. So those are the 3 recommendations that we recognize there's going to be some laws that need to change, especially like in the childcare industry. Not everybody has, I don't think, maybe Annalise, you can speak to that, but I don't think that's on anywhere that you have to have that particular training to do childcare. So anyway, those are 3 of the recommendations. I'll let my team speak up if there's anything additional they're thinking, but those are the 3 big ones that we're looking at.
Hi, this is JJ from ODE. I just would like to reiterate that some of those factors do actually exist in education as far as educating our educators on what problematic sexual behaviors look like in education. So maybe we'll do kind of a go back and look at some of that because some of that does exist. And we do have people in regions who are able to navigate that systems in the regions to connect our youth and our families from schools to community resources as well. And those are written in legislation.
Great. Thank you, JJ. Our goal is not that we have to recreate it. It's more of how do we uplift what's currently there and maybe enhance what's currently there. So like if the school's already doing it and they already have it, great, how can we enhance it? So thank you for that, JJ. I appreciate that because it depends on the district you're in, depends on your principal, some of those things. So thank you, JJ. Yeah, you're right. We don't want to reinvent.
Absolutely. Love that. And I'm happy to share out next on the funding committee because we also talked very similarly about that.
Can I just ask for a slight change? So our union would oppose any sort of legislative requirement to require this class. What our union would wholeheartedly embrace is that recommendation that providers who take the course they'll get continuing education hours for it, obviously, but that if they take the hours, they get a stipend to reward them for taking that extra step because they get a little taste of it in the mandatory reporting, the recognizing and reporting child abuse and neglect training that they take. So instead of forcing it down throats in an unmandated fashion, because we don't, educators, when they take training, sometimes they get paid for that training during in-service. Childcare providers, that's not the case. We're independent and we own our own businesses. So, and we have to pay our workers then. So that's a huge unfunded mandate. What we would ask is that you set up and maybe even recommend that each provider that takes this gets, $200 or whatever. It's tied to the number of hours that of class they take. And just so that everybody knows, our union has been proactive in this, and we're already working on a training. We already have it approved through the Oregon Registry online, and we are launching it as a set 3 high level course for 10 hours. So it's already there. We'll just if you want to recommend that people get paid for taking it, that'd be amazing.
Thank you.
Can you specify which union you're speaking of? Is that the union, or is there a separate union for childcare?
We are the teachers unions never wanted us, so we are the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, Local 132 childcare providers together.
Wonderful, thank you. We would keep in mind that if we go that route, we may need to think about those 2 entities separately because I think that there may be potential differences between the 2 as we look at what we would provide for educators in our school systems versus the work that you do in childcare services.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, huge difference night and day between K-12 educators and childcare providers doing the same work and the same quality of work, but in important education, obviously. But there is no parity in working conditions between teachers and early educators. So
I love this additional dialogue, the bringing in the context, because it's all important so that we can differentiate. And JJ, I just wanted to ask if you could also offer up the specific legislation that is in place for educators, that is the curriculum that's already being provided around that. Mainly because as Elena said, that it's to amplify, and I know that some of the feedback that came through in the informational report that was submitted earlier was that even though that's a resource in every region that's offered through ODE, that it's, you know, as Elena said, like depends upon accessibility and staffing and rural areas versus not. And so just really wanting to give language that there's already legislation in place and we're trying to enhance that, get more funding so that the resources are brought in to support the legislation.
Absolutely. And I will clarify that the legislation supports the person within the regions that Elena was speaking of to help support that community connection to mental health supports for the youth. So that's specifically what the mental health provides. And I will get you that legislation. I'll put the link to the ORS and the OARs within that for you right now, and then get you some more information as well.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for everybody to look at
quick.
each other's theories. Yes, Jenna, go
Sorry,
for it.
I know that JJ was going to talk about funding, and I just wanted to bop this in real quick before we jump over to that. But I think, and my group can kind of share if there's anything else, but I think one of the things that we're talking about is kind of like, how do we create that hub? And I know that's implementation and not goal, but something that I wanted to suggest was just if folks haven't read the New Jersey document within the Dropbox, that they read that, because that's actually really similar to a lot of the recommendations we're going to make. And so, yeah, reading that. And then if there are any concerns or questions about like what that might look like in Oregon, bringing that to our work group and we can kind of chew on that together.
Love it. Yes, that's great. Okay, JJ, you feeling ready to speak about funding streams or?
You know, I'm happy to, but I've just done a lot of talking. And so I will
Debbie.
I'm more than happy to let Debbie or I think it was Melanie that was in our group speak if they want to.
Debbie has a new friend.
Yeah,
Debbie's now
we're,
with the
we're
team.
together now. We're sharing our resources.
My camera doesn't work. Justine's mic works, so we're trying to piecemeal it together. Anyway, funding streams. I think the brief update is we do need to do a little deeper dive into the New Jersey model. We're also hoping to look at the North Carolina model to look at not only kind of the grant funding and some of the other kind of maybe startup costs, but also the sustainable funding and the players for that braided funding. The braided funding to really put into the legislature, and then some broad strokes about what needs to be the ongoing focus, like an advisory committee that's formed to, again, do maybe a more resource mapping with some of the existing funding sources through like ODE and OIA, so that we can get more information for ongoing. But those broad stroke recommendations for continuing to look at the funding, I think there's a lot of concern about if there is going to be any funding, or to what extent can we ask for that. But I think it's worth a while to have some ongoing, obviously past this just group, to look at the funding sources and getting those in place, and also just the hub of resources, because there already are existing, like Jen was talking about, and some way of bringing that together so that we're not recreating or trying to ask for additional funding when, like, the schools already have some, and it sounds like childcare, they're going to have some education. So how do we get the funding for that? But bringing those together. So that's broad strokes and kind of where we are. I think we're not quite ready to do the proposals, but almost. And Jen, add anything you want, or Melanie as well.
Thank you, Debbie, for representing our group.
Yes, absolutely. I have nothing to add on my part.
Okay, I can then start. Oh, Jesse, were you gonna say something?
Well, I'm just wondering, I will tell you, I'd like from the OHA perspective, there is no money for this. I am wondering if you may hear the exact same thing from the ODE, OYA. So I'm wondering if you might want to include the recommendation to write what's called a policy option package, which is how governmental organizations ask for funds. Or to recommend that a legislator put this into a bill, which is how legislators ask for money. So it would be, or maybe both, because otherwise we're not going to get additional funds of any sort. So.
Thank you, Jesse. That was one of the conversations that we did have, is looking at one of the future legislative sessions, and in knowing, like, excuse me, current state of funding is that I think that legislation our legislators are currently interested in funding things that are already happening as opposed to something new. And I think that that goes back to what Debbie was talking about with the resource mapping, is where is this work already being done and how do we show with our data that it's working, and then going in with that would be a really powerful statement. Absolutely.
All right, Justine.
Yeah, so I can just kind of share briefly, I think, the action step our work group is kind of focused on is really like laying out the system response on paper. I think we've had a lot of wonderful, rich conversations. And when we're getting to like the nitty gritty, I think it's always really helpful. And Darian and Sarah did a fabulous job kind of mapping out their ideal pathway that we're going to kind of work from. It's always easier to like respond and work with something when you have something in front of you, right? Instead of just the abstract conversations. So we have a couple action steps in the next couple weeks about we kind of split up the workload. Some of us who are kind of filling in, adding to the framework. And then we have a couple folks who are gonna kind of do a second pass at it, ask questions, kind of bring specific points for discussion. And then I think our goal is that in our next work group meeting, we'll be kind of digging into that a little bit more. I think we're probably further away from like the list of kind of recommendations ready to go than maybe some of the other work groups are. But kind of keep coming back to several key points that I think I would feel comfortable saying are probably going to be, in our recommendations somewhere, and folks can jump in if this doesn't feel accurate or you have something you want to add. But I think several things that also align with what other work groups are talking about. We've continued to talk about having some sort of entity that's going to steward this work moving forward, knowing that this is not a short-term solution. Like, this is a long-term conversation and process that we need to continue to nurture. And then we've talked a lot about what that, as the mental health resources group is talking about, like, who are those point people, that point committee, that local resource expert that can like navigate some of this work and get support to families that's in their local community. And I think we've talked about a couple different versions of that, like what that could look like. And so are also really excited to hear more about New Jersey's process and like where the funding comes from those people and like what entity those navigators work for. And then I think continue to talk about, and Kristen just brought up, I think a key question that we're going to need to keep talking about, of specifically around DHS, child welfare, but also all of our other systems, like what's the threshold that we need each system involved, and knowing that each system has its own thresholds, but also we need everyone at the table. So I think are continuing to talk about ways and strategies to do that. So that's my short version. Other folks chime in if it feels like there are critical things that I missed or just things you want to point out.
Did I understand correctly in that there's a draft version of a pathway that Sarah and Darian have started to put together already? Or is it that that's What's
Yeah, so and I think the point that we'll share it with to get, because we then will want to, of course, get everyone else's feedback is once we've done that initial fleshing out. So we're, I think, going to do that step and then share it out and ask for feedback. So that will be a helpful action step that we would love for other folks to have. And I would also just say, I know we discussed at our like work group lead check-in that our work group has a lot more people in it than everyone else's work groups. And so I know, and I don't know if it's helpful maybe to lift up that discussion again, of just if there are action steps or places where some of the smaller work groups would appreciate more eyes or feedback. I think all of us, are not so attached to like just staying in our work groups and doing it. And I guess I'm hearing particularly with folks in the mental health work group, if we're talking about that kind of systems navigator role, maybe having a shared meeting would be a good step. I guess that's one option that kind of comes to my mind. Again, knowing that adding a ton more meetings to anyone's plate is probably not realistic. So I guess would put that offer or idea out there. And I would also share, just because Debbie, you brought up the question about North Carolina and getting that info, that I know our CAC folks, I think now have a meeting set next week that Shelley from OCAS organized to circle back with Jeff Sidoli, who's at NCA, who had initially shared some of that. So we'll try and get some more information from him about the North Carolina piece.
Quick question about that, Justine. Is that specifically for all CACs? Is that something that like maybe a few folks from the work group could kind of like shadow in on?
Yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking for other people since I'm not the one who organized the meeting. But one of the things we did ask is if Jeff in particular or Amelia, who's from Western Regional, would be willing to do an informational interview like we've talked about. So I think, and other, Sarah, Darian, Amelia, feel free to jump in if this doesn't feel accurate, but it feels like since that meeting is scheduled with kind of those folks, maybe we start there. And then I think certainly one of the goals is just around, looking at resources and how those folks can support us. So we'll happily share opportunities for that. I think that's one of the goals. But
Awesome.
welcome other folks' thoughts or opinions about that. Cool. I see Sarah saying agreed, and I saw Amelia's thumbs up. So I think we'll start there. But yes, please don't take that anyone is like trying to, we've got, want to circle back to a couple things and then are definitely in mind about how we can get some of these great experts who are doing this work here in Oregon to support us.
And just wanted to uplift that Jeff is someone we're in contact with too, as being one of our final guest speakers here in the committee. So if there's focused questions that you all might have for him, just like we did for New Jersey and capturing questions in advance, that would be great to send, but we're in email correspondence about him coming.
Any other questions or updates for the good of the whole? Right. Should we do an extra long break?
We can totally do an extra long break and come back at the top of the hour at 11 to hear the presentation. But because we do have a couple minutes, I do want to ask, like, if any ideas have been percolating about the final convening, just because we have the space, please uplift that now. Because when June hits, we got to like book venues, we need to send out invitations. So would love if there's any early ideas around how you all would like to spend your time closing this part out.
Or if you have recommended venues, Tashawn and I will take all the logistics recommendations for Portland.
Is there anything specific y'all are looking for in regards to the space that might help with like logistics and recommendations?
That's a great question for the committee.
We just had a retreat recently, and they held it at the McMinimans in Troutdale, which is not exactly in Portland. It's a little bit outside the city, down the gorge, but there's a hotel there. So for people from out of town, you can stay right there, like literally in the building, and there's a spa and a pool. So it's a nice place for sort of self-care-y kind of things for people who are staying there. So, turned out pretty well as a nice place to have a sort of all day sort of thing. So just saying. Edgefield indeed.
How do people feel about that? I know we did a poll and there was half folks that said Portland, but there are also a lot of people that are like, we would love to do something outside of Portland. So how do people feel about being at a place in Edgefield that has more of a self-care kind of vibe to it?
Well, to clarify, it's 15 minutes from Portland. So it's not, you're talking about outside of Portland. Yeah.
Yeah. It's outside Portland.
Does I see a thumbs up?
Yeah, I guess I would just say, yeah, I love that thinking, Jessica. I mean, what a lovely space. And also would just, yeah, I mean, I answered Portland on my survey because that's convenient for me, but just would continue to acknowledge the folks who are much further away from Portland. And if we have the resources to support folks and get in places, just I would fully support if the choice is to do it somewhere else, to acknowledge the breadth of Oregon. So just, I guess, putting that out there as well.
Oh, but thanks for sharing that, Jesse, because I did look it up and it's beautiful. So if we don't go with this place, I'm pinning it for a personal visit. Our trees in Cali don't. Does it look like Oregon? All right.
Is there anything you all would like to get out of closing time together? So in the agenda flow, as we shared, it's more about our idea is presenting to community, learning from community, networking in community, and then we can plan a closing activity. So you all have a piece of this container to keep with you. But is there anything outside of that that you all are interested in getting out of a closing time together? Anything about that excites you then? Like, if there's nothing to add to it, is there parts of that you're like, yes, I like how that sounds of a way to close or convene?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, is there any part of that day that sounds like that's a good way to close out the time together that you're excited about or interested in?
Oh, absolutely. I I want it to be like this our first convening. I mean, like, I was such an awe. I have no words. I was such at peace. Like, it was the best day ever. Like, just the feeling, the gathering, like everything. It was amazing. So if you guys can make it feel just like that, then I am for whatever you guys pick.
Thanks for that, Diane.
Will everybody be there that was there the first time?
It looks like in the chat, I know Sarah said she's unfortunately unable to make it. So there might be a couple folks from the committee that the date conflicts with, but
Oh, okay.
I do believe. Most.
But your people, like the people
Oh,
that
on our
you-
side, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, that was something that we were curious about. Originally, that was the plan, because they're very interested in seeing how it
Yeah,
closes out. So if you all would like to see them again, we can invite them.
absolutely. I would love that.
Thanks, Diane.
I'll just, yeah, echo what Debbie put in the chat. I think that feels really critical. I know we had the reflection question to start with today around like, how do we support healing or kind of reconnect, circle back with families who've like already been through this experience and already experienced harm. So I don't know what exactly that would look like but that feels like a goal that I'd love to have in mind. And I guess I'd just share the other thing I feel excited about is just, again, with this conversation about knowing that this work is going to continue well beyond this, just I love the idea of having community partners who are already engaged in this work be present or engaged in some way, because I just think continuing to nurture like some of these conversations and connections is going to be so critical. So I appreciate seeing and kind of thinking about that goal as well.
That's really helpful because then that makes us think about who else to invite, right? Especially to the afternoon session. Maybe Michelle Pfeiffer, who came and presented early on as the liaison, maybe Director Flint, other folks from Oregon that can speak to the next steps in moving this work along. And I guess the last thing that I would like to ask is, this is the last month where we're really trying to get more caregiver and community voice and input, and we still are wanting to organize a panel for caregivers with youth that have initiated PSB that are ages 13 and up. So if you have any ideas in mind for folks that you want to uplift for that, we have started the process of circling back to the other parent panel because they still want to offer up recommendations. So we're just going to have a closed informational interview kind of session with them in 2 weeks, and we'll be able to offer that video up to the whole committee.
You mean to be at our convening? Is that what you're
It's
asking?
both. It's to be,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
it's because we're gonna send invitations out to folks.
Okay.
We're gonna create flyers and all that, so it's both
Okay.
meeting, but also last session, the input was to have one more caregiver panel.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's time for that panel to be with caregivers who have youth that are teens.
Okay. And if they come to the convening, will they be taken care of, like as far as like hotel and that kind of stuff?
That's a really great question. If I think we have to look at how many folks from the committee might be in
Okay.
need of that, and then look at the budget that we have and put all that in. But I will say I would love for that to be a thing that
Okay.
we're able to offer.
Okay.
And so it'll come down to, if there are caregivers that you know of, please,
Right.
we can confirm with you for sure by July, because then we can
Okay.
have more concrete numbers for things.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say that Edgefield is really great about community and engaging, and if somebody approached them about what we're trying to do, it's possible they might help bridge some of that gap. They are very community focused.
Such a beautiful sentiment to put out there. Thank you for that. I love how it's coming together. Look at that. We didn't know what to do in 10 minutes of great discussion. Fantastic. And now we break. All right. Well, thank you all. We'll see you back in 10 minutes. We are here. So for this last hour, thank you, Sarah. I see, and Valeria's coming in. Great. Okay. So for this last hour, we have some amazing partners that are here and coming into the space. They are members from the New Jersey Children's Alliance, which is a statewide nonprofit dedicated to promoting hope and healing and justice for child abuse victims. So we have Nadia, Maria, who also goes by Myth, and Valeria, who are all here. Nadia is going to kick us off, and she's the director of the statewide initiatives, and she can introduce more about her and her team. And We appreciate them coming in today, and we shared some high level, this is where we're at as a committee with them. We've had a couple informational interviews, and also share the questions that have came up. And so we're really excited to hear more from them about their process. And yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Nadia.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Nydia Managas with New Jersey Children's Alliance. MIP actually got called into jury duty today, so she will not be joining us. But I am the Director of Training and Statewide Initiatives, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing with the PSB program. And Valeria is here. Valeria, do you just want to introduce yourself?
I'm Valeria. I'm the program coordinator for the PSB program.
So can I share my screen? Okay.
Let me know.
Okay. It says starting screen will stop other participants' computer sound share. Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
I've never seen that warning before. All right, let's see. Where is it? Here we go. Oops. I just turned off my thing. Okay. So my goal is to get through this with enough time to leave some time for questions at the end. I know that we have a hard stop at 3 o'clock. And so I do have my notes to try to keep me on track, because I can talk about this for hours and hours and hours. So I will, try to be mindful of time as we're moving through this. And so Dr. Nish asked me to talk a little bit about how the program started, how we got to where we are, a little bit about the training and treatment programs that we have going through this process, and then, maybe some lessons learned. So that's what I'm hoping to get through today. So just in terms of our program history, I'm sure, as you all know, we don't really know how common problematic sexual behaviors in youth are, because data is not collected consistently, if at all. And there are no systems that are in charge of collecting that data. So what we do know is that more than 1/3 of sexual offenses against child victims are committed by minors, as reported by juvenile offense records and charges. We also have the National Children's Alliance data, which is the accrediting body of our over 950 child advocacy centers throughout the country. And they estimate that about 25% of the sexual abuse cases seen at our CACs are initiated by minors. And in New Jersey, we found similar data. Our child advocacy centers and our regional diagnostic and treatment centers reported that between 15 and 30% of the cases that are coming through their doors also involved behavior initiated by a minor. In addition, as part of this process, we collected our own data from the hotline to determine how many cases were coming in through the hotline that were being screened out. And we found that over a year, over 2,000 cases involving problematic sexual behaviors were screened out at the child abuse hotline level. And about 1,000 cases were screened in for child welfare assessment. There were probably more than that involving PSB that were screened in as a Child Protective Services investigation, but those wouldn't be coded in that way because they would be coded as abuse or neglect. So we don't know exactly how many cases that are coded in as CPS involve PSB. So in 2021, we came to the realization that we did not have a statewide response for cases involving PSB, particularly for cases that were not involved with Child Protective Services or law enforcement. Our child abuse hotline was receiving thousands of calls, as I mentioned, regarding PSB concerns. And while some cases were being screened in, many were not being screened in. So we were concerned that those families presumably were not getting access to appropriate services. We wanted to make sure that youth whose cases were screened out and their families were gaining access to services that were specialized and evidence-based, because the data tells us that treatment works. So in terms of our group, when we realized that we needed to come up with some kind of response to ensure that these kids who were not involved in systems access services, the Commissioner of the Department of Children and Families, Christine Horwitz-Beyer, and I decided to convene a work group. And these are the partners that we decided, with feedback from other people, to include in this initiative. And so we have representatives from various departments within our Department of Children and Families. So we have our commissioner, we have the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, which is our Child Protective Services arm. Our Children's System of Care, which provide behavioral services, and developmental services for kids across the from 0 to 18, and for older kids who are on who receive developmental disability services. We also involved representatives from our state central registry, our child abuse hotline. In addition, of course, we were there. We had representatives from all of our multidisciplinary team disciplines. So we had the County Prosecutors Association, we had law enforcement, we had Division of Criminal Justice, a victim advocate, MBT coordinator, different providers of medical and mental health services, representation from our task force, and we had our care management organizations as part of the process. And we'll talk a little bit about them in a second. So all in all, we had, probably about 30 or so people on this group that met pretty regularly. So when we convened, we determined that in addition to our ongoing conversations as a work group, we wanted to collect some data. We did some surveys with our CACs and MDTs throughout the state to ask how they were currently handling these cases that were coming through their doors. We had our child abuse hotline, as I mentioned earlier, look at data for a year to see how many cases are they screening out. We looked at, we got some caregivers who were involved. We have one pretty active PSB program in the state. And so we had some caregivers that went through that program talk about how, what the process was like for them in accessing PSB services and understanding their experiences. We spoke with other states about how they addressed the issues and how they funded their response to PSB. And in addition, we surveyed our own state about the availability of evidence-based treatment providers. We also obtained so much data from our meetings. We met every 4 to 6 weeks for well over a year and are still meeting intermittently. Meetings are well attended, and we had those scheduled meetings, we had pre-meetings, we had post-meetings, so we had tons of meetings with various partners. And as a result of that data we collected, we developed a framework for providing a consistent response to families affected by PSB to include not only the youth who engaged in the problematic sexual behavior, but also the youth who were impacted by the problematic sexual behavior. So this is the document that I shared with you all. Just to kind of give you a sense of the framework we developed based on all of the data that we collected. We sort of divided it up into 4 buckets at the time. With regard to referrals, we aim to answer the question, how do families access services when there are no abuse or neglect concerns? We focused on the cases that did not warrant a CPS response, because presumably when CPS gets involved, these kids are accessing services through the MDT response. Regarding training, we considered where families can be referred for specialized services and the need to educate partners and community agencies about PSB and the related resources. With regard to funding, we aimed to ensure that families had access to specialized services regardless of their ability to pay. And then lastly, in the area of oversight and quality assurance, we wanted to make sure that there was ongoing oversight of the PSB initiative and be able to assess that what we are doing is what we hope to do and that our response is effective. Okay. So this is a flow chart that kind of describes the referral process. So on the right-hand side, you can see that when a case comes into the hotline, if it's screened in for a child protective services investigation or a child welfare assessment, it goes to our local offices for child protective services, and there's a response on that end. And, presumably children and families are connected to services through their involvement in that system. We were concerned about the cases on the left-hand side, those over 2,000 cases that were being screened out at the hotline level. And so we established a response for those cases. What we developed was at the very beginning, sort of the gatekeeper of this whole process is a specialized team that was developed within our child abuse hotline, which is our state central screening hotline. When that call came in there, and if it was being screened out, we said, instead of just telling the caller to have the family call X, Y, and Z resource, we said, please let them know that we have this new program to support families, and that they'll be receiving a phone call from what we called specialized care coordinators that will be contacting families to provide psychoeducation and resources. And so that specialized team within the child abuse hotline has received specialized training in doing a little bit of additional assessment for these cases that we need on our end. And they have almost 24-hour coverage over at the hotline. I think that's just 1 day a week where they don't have coverage. Otherwise, they are there from 12, a.m. to 11:59 p.m. There's at least one person who's trained. Otherwise, all of the other screeners have some training as well, and they handle those calls. And when someone from the team reports in, they'll look at the screenings from the previous time to make any determinations if there were cases that maybe should have been screened in or screened out or whatever. So they'll take a second look at those cases. So after that screening and referral team screens out a case, it's referred to 2 places. One is law enforcement. Our county prosecutors' offices have an opportunity to look at the case and see if it's something that they feel they need to investigate and respond to. It also goes concurrently to our specialized care coordinator. These are positions that were created within each of our care management organizations. So in New Jersey, we have these community organizations that provide a variety of services, from intensive home-based services to case management services to traditional therapeutic services. And we already have state coverage of those care management organizations. They are covering all 21 counties. And so we decided to place these new positions within those CMOs, those care management organizations, because they already have those local relationships. They already have systems in place for connecting children and families to services. And so that's positions we created. We housed them out of the care management organizations. So then when the care management, the specialized care coordinators get the contact information for the caregiver and for the referent, they will follow up with the referent to find out if the referent contacted the family to let them know they'd be receiving a phone call. At least then when they call the caregiver, they'll know that they've had some information about this process. Many times the callers don't want the families to know they made that call, right? They want to remain anonymous. And so our specialized care coordinators are making sort of a cold call to families, providing them with education, information, and resources, and offering them the opportunity to participate in an intake so that they can be connected to a specialized medical evaluation and or evidence-based mental health services. So the other piece I mentioned earlier was that our initial, we did data, we collected data to see, do we even have providers, right? It would be great to create this referral system, but if we have no one to refer them to, right, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. So what we learned, what really was just reinforced and validated, was that we had very few providers who had training in providing evidence-based treatment services to youth who engage in PSP. We do have a lot of providers in New Jersey for working with youth who were impacted by PSP. We have lots of providers trained in TFCBT, which is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. So our kids who are impacted by PSP, we refer to them. But we had 2 providers in the entire state at the time that we could refer children and families to. So as a result of that, we really, before we even implemented the referral process that I showed you on the previous slide, we started to train people. So we started with training folks in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy for problematic sexual behaviors. So that training is open to anyone who's already certified in TFCBT, which is a trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, can do an advanced training to be able to apply that model to youth, children who are engaging in problematic sexual behaviors. And so we got a bunch of clinicians trained in that model. We also started to find individuals and agencies to train on PSB CBT for adolescents, which I'll talk about a little bit more on what that model looks like, which is the sort of gold standard for working with youth who engage in PSB, both from preschool to school age to adolescence. In addition to training mental health providers and building up that referral base, we had to train our specialized care coordinators. These were specialized positions. There's no precedent for them. They didn't already exist. And so we created a training menu for, what do we think people who are taking on these positions need to be aware of and what do they need to learn? So I think they've received over 65 hours of training in the first year to be able to do this work. So everything ranging from just understanding child abuse and neglect to, specific training around PSB in children and adolescents, to doing screenings, our MDT and CA Child Advocacy Center response, and, the entire spectrum. The other important piece of this framework that we recognized really early on was that before we can even get families to voluntarily engage in services, keeping in mind that these are families that are screened out from Child Protective Services involvement, so they're not mandated to treatment. They are absolutely voluntarily engaging in services. In order for them to even accept that phone call and consider, being engaged in services, we need to change the way our communities talk about these youth and families. And so the specialized care coordinators were charged with, especially in their first year, to do a ton of training with anyone who would listen. So they were doing training for their local Child Protective Services offices, to any school system that would allow them to train, youth serving organizations, community agencies, whomever, to talk about PSB, to talk about the appropriate language, with regard to how we refer to children and families engaging in PSB, to talk about the importance of treatment. And so we did tons of training in that area as well. So just a little bit about, I know that one of the questions that Dr. Nishman brought to our attention was wanting to understand a little bit more about the treatment model that we chose. And so this is not my area of expertise, but I'll share a little bit about PSB CBT. We did partner with the University of Oklahoma. They are they do all the training for PSB throughout the country, for PSB CBT throughout the country. And so we partnered with them to be able to do some training with our folks in New Jersey. The model is nationally recognized and it's supported by research. So in order for a treatment model to be evidence-based, it has to undergo really rigorous research. And so this model has been rigorously researched. And so we know that it works, and the research shows us that less than 3% of children who engage in treatment will ever repeat the behavior again. And so we know it works. The other thing about the PSB CBT model is that it involves not only the youth, but the caregiver has to be involved. There's a requirement for caregiver involvement in the treatment model. The other piece is that it can be delivered either through a group model or family model. The group model is preferred. The research demonstrates that kids being engaged in the group model is really effective because they can see that they're not the only ones, and all the shame and stigma that comes along with engaging in this behavior, can sort of, be minimized by seeing that it's not an uncommon behavior that they engage in, and that they can heal from the process, because the groups are open groups. And so kids can enter at any time, and they might enter at a time where next week is a graduation for kids who finished treatment already, right? So they see that there is hope and that they'll be okay through this process. The same for the caregivers. They get to see that their kids are gonna succeed. So just one of the studies that I wanted to just briefly share was they looked at 220 youth who had completed PSB CBT treatment. They did follow-up after about 10 years, an average of 10 years. They reached out to these children and families again to see how they were doing. So at that point, at the follow-up, the kids were they were now adults, between the ages of 17 and 35. They looked at their arrest records from Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations. They looked at juvenile affair records, and they looked at the Department of Human Services database to see how are these kids doing. And what the data showed us is that only 3% of kids who completed treatment ever had a sexual rearrest or report, as compared to 15% of kids who did not participate in or complete treatment. And so we see that there's a significant decrease in the behavior for youth who complete treatment. The other thing is that we know that kids who engage in PSB oftentimes may also engage in other kinds of concerning behaviors. And so for kids who completed treatment, only the completers were half as likely to have a non-sexual arrest or report, such as property crimes or drug-related crimes. Okay, so that it not only impacted their ability to manage their behaviors with regard to sexualized behaviors, it also led to a decrease in other kinds of concerning behaviors. The strongest predictor of successful completion was parent-caregiver involvement, right? Which is why it's required. We know that caregivers are a key component of the treatment model. And so them being involved is important. And then the other thing that they learned after follow-up was that the strongest predictor of further problematic behavior was whether or not caregivers were involved and their past history. So if caregivers weren't as involved, a greater likelihood of repeating behaviors, the more involvement, the fewer behaviors. Also, if they were engaged in treatment after having already had a significant arrest record or reports around PSB, it was going to be much more challenging for them to successfully complete treatment. Okay, so clearly then our goal is, as soon as that first report comes in, let's get these kids engaged in treatment. The sooner we can engage in treatment, the more likely it's going to be resolved and they're not going to repeat that behavior again. And not only does that mean we're not going to have kids involved in juvenile justice systems as a result of repeat behaviors, it also means we're not going to have any more kids who are impacted by PSB, which is equally important. So just a little bit about the model. I mentioned it's an open group, so it does allow, first of all, it minimizes wait times because you don't have to wait for the group to finish so that someone else can start. But it also allows for kids to enter at different points in the treatment model so that they can see kids who are further along than they are and that they are healing and they are succeeding, and families can see the same. The group model is based on peer focused, based on mutual support. Sessions are 90 minutes, and both the caregiver and the youth are in concurrent sessions. And then depending on what the session is that week, there may be some conjoined time for the groups to get together. And, treatment is typically 12 months for adolescents. So kids 13 and over, they're typically in treatment for 12 months. For a kid who completely had been involved in treatment, it might be shorter. I'll also add that I'm talking about the PSB-CBT adolescent model. That's the one that we just finished up. But there's also a school age model that we just started a new collaborative now with 8 different agencies and I think about 30 clinicians who are going through it now. The school age model is very similar with regard to the format and the modality, but it's shorter. So it's about 6 months for kids between 6 and 12. And then they also have a preschool model, which we haven't trained on yet. They have to be trained in the school age model before they're trained in the preschool. So there's also a school age model that goes from 3 to 6 years old. These are just some of the treatment modules that are covered in treatment for PSB-CBT for adolescents. It's a very similar content for the school age as well. All right, so a little bit about funding. We were very fortunate that I mentioned the Commissioner of the Department of Children and Families, Commissioner Beyer, was invested from the very beginning. She was at every single meeting. She, was representing not only her department, but also the importance of kids and families having access to services. So she was a key partner for us, obviously. And not only did she show up and participate and made sure her staff participated, they also funded. When we decided what we were going to do and what it was going to look like, they put up the money to make sure that happened. And so our Department of Children and Families is currently funding the specialized care coordinator positions I mentioned earlier. The funding also covers our program staff. Right now we have a PSB program manager, and we have a program coordinator who really handles all of our data. And then I'm, part-time on that part of the funding. That funding also covers training for mental health clinicians. I didn't mention, but these collaboratives are not only super intensive in that they require, if treatment is 12 months for adolescents, that means that our clinicians are in training for 18 to 24 months, right? So it's a really intensive long-term commitment for these clinicians to get involved in this treatment modality, and it's super costly. So we want to make sure that they are invested and are going to be able to follow through as we determine who is going to participate in the treatment modality training. We also have funding to cover training for our specialized care coordinators, our MDT partners, our community members. And then really importantly, at the end of the day, we were really concerned about equity. We said, you know, it shouldn't matter who engaged in the behavior or which system is involved. Kids should have access to this to great services regardless of their entry point. And so we wanted to make sure that kids who were going to be able to participate in treatment services were going to be able to do so at no cost to their families. Because if they were involved with CPS or involved with the juvenile justice system, they wouldn't be paying for services. So we didn't want them to have to enter those services, those systems to access services. And so the commissioner also provided funding for this Child Treatment Assistance Fund that covers the medical and mental health services. The last bucket is oversight and quality assurance. So, you know, like with any program, you want to make sure that what we're doing, that what we're doing is really working and that we're doing what we intended to do. And so in that vein, we created this PSP program manager position, which we mentioned earlier. MIP provides training and technical assistance to all of our SCC teams and their program partners. I should mention that the SCCs are not NJCA employees. They are hired by the care management organizations. They have DCF, our Department of Children and Families, has contracts with those care management organizations. They directly fund those contracts through them, and then they hire those specialized care coordinators and have an assigned supervisor for them within these care management organizations. We provide training and technical assistance to the SCCs and their supervisors. The PSP program manager is also responsible for developing and delivering trainings around PSP, both for the SCCs and for statewide community organizations that we also do presentations for. She also administers the Child Treatment Assistance Fund with support from Valeria, our program coordinator, as well as our finance team for our organization contributes some of their time to the PSP program. The other important piece is data collection and analysis. As you can see, our first hire was a program manager. Our second hire was someone who can deal with the data, right? For us from the very, very beginning, it was important that if we're going to be doing this, we want to make sure we're doing it right. And so we invested in that. And so Valeria came on board for us to be able to not only collect data and then have this ton of data we do nothing with, but be able to then demonstrate what we're doing to our various partner agencies. And then be able to share with other states as well. The other thing that we created was what we called a feedback loop. One of the concerns was if these cases are not being screened in PSP is concerning, right? It's serious. It's not something that we try to undermine or minimize. It is a serious concern when a child is engaging in problematic sexual behaviors. But we don't want them to have to access systems unnecessarily. But we wanted to make sure that if they needed to access a system, that we had a process for that to happen. And so if it gets screened out and our specialized care coordinators learn information that suggests that maybe something was missed, there's a process for us to get back in touch with the hotline and say, hey, take a look at this case again. Same thing with law enforcement. If law enforcement feels like in their investigation something was missed, they can also refer back to the hotline to make sure that we're all on the same page. The other thing that we developed is a PSP advisory board, which is responsible for reviewing the trends of our program, looking at any issues that are arising and helping us address any issues or barriers that are happening as a result of so many partners being involved in this initiative, making sure that we're spending the money that we're supposed to be spending the money and that our program is sustainable. Okay, so just some lessons learned. Don't rush the process. We learned, I mean, we knew from the beginning that buy-in from our stakeholders was critical. We were very thoughtful when we decided who needed to be at the table. And I will be completely honest that we were not all on the same page from the very beginning, right? Everyone, came into it, I'm sure, with their own sort of ideas of how things should look. But we all had to get to a place where we could listen to each other and let the process sort of evolve organically. If the people who are going to be part of the ultimate response are not part of the creation of that response, they're not going to be invested, and it's going to be much harder to get buy-in down the road. And so we decided, let's do the work up front. Let's get buy-in up front, even if that's going to take us longer, so that we're all invested and we all do what we need to do to make sure that we are successful. At the end of it all, I don't think anyone got exactly what they hoped for, but everyone's voice was heard and a piece of what their concerns were at least addressed. The other piece is, providing opportunities for ongoing check-ins with our partners, our partner agencies, our stakeholders. We couldn't just create the system and say, okay, now it's implemented, all right, goodbye, right? There had to be this, we recognized really early on, there had to be this ongoing process for connection. We have our PSB advisory board, which allows for some of that, but MIP and Valeria have regular opportunities for check-ins with our specialized care coordinators and their supervisors. We have check-ins with the executive directors of those care management organizations. We have check-ins with our hotline, since they're sort of the gatekeeper. We have regular check-ins with our providers. So we are constantly checking in with them, seeing where people are, what's working, what's not working, and trying to problem solve issues. And we want to make sure that throughout the process, people are continuously feeling like they're being heard. Another lesson, that we learned was the importance of being flexible and open-minded. As I mentioned, we had no idea what it was going to look like when it started. We sort of let it evolve on its own based on our data, based on our conversations. And what we have now is the result of allowing that organic process to happen. Another thing, in terms of being flexible, we thought coming into this that we were going to have a lot more referrals for adolescents engaging in PSB. And so we invested in training providers to work with adolescents engaging in PSB. And we learned that really the majority of our referrals are for school age kids. And so we had to, pivot and shift and find ways to ensure that those kids still access services. While developing a framework at the state level is certainly achievable, it's so important to leave room for local jurisdictions to address the unique needs of their characteristics and the characteristics of their communities. So while we've created some kind of guidelines of our expectations of what things are going to look like, we've allowed for a lot of autonomy at the local level to figure out what's going to work, given who their partners are, what they know about the people that they're serving. It's important to develop a plan with everyone who's involved about how we're going to share information, right? Everyone, this was a big shift for all of our partner agencies, and many of them are doing something new that they've never done before. So we're asking them to do more and not giving necessarily additional resources, particularly for, our law enforcement, our hotline, and those folks. So they want to know that their investment is also worthwhile. So determining what that sharing of information is going to look like is really important, so that they are getting what they need and we're getting the data that we need to be able to provide them the information they're looking for. Relatedly, making sure that you are defining those data points as soon as possible, as early as possible, so that you can provide that information in a timely and as accurate as possible manner. One of the things that we're doing now is going back and recoding data and reconceptualizing what it was that we were trying to assess. And that's taking a lot more work, on the back end to do that. And then, remembering ultimately it's about the children, right? So when people were stuck in these meetings and we're just like, no, it should be this agency that's doing this, or we shouldn't be doing this. It kind of went back to, this is about the kids. about the kids getting access to services. No one wants these children to unnecessarily end up in juvenile justice and to have to be charged because, you know, the last time that they engaged in the behavior, they did not get the help that they needed. And it could have been addressed early on, and they didn't have to harm another child and end up in the system. And so we just had to keep checking in with ourselves and reminding ourselves that it's not about our individual agencies or individual roles. It's really about ensuring that these kids and families get what they need. So lastly, some next steps for us. We started our data collection using, you know, Jot Forms, which is kind of like a survey tool, and have finally kicked off a data management system. So now all of our data with regard to our referrals coming in through the hotline and all the work that the SCCs are doing is going into a data management system. So it's going to make it much more easy for us to access data and for there to be accountability and much less room for user error, which we, you know, learned in our process. Of course, continue to track our program outcomes. We are constantly looking at the data, seeing what it's telling us, and it's informing not only our practice, but also the training that we offer to our SCCs and to our provider agencies. We are providing that ongoing training and technical assistance to SCCs all the time. We just created a bunch, you know, the training calendar for the rest of this year for our SCCs, really based on what that data is telling us. And we are, our biggest endeavor now is looking at creating legislation to support our program. We are in an election year for our governor, which means not only will leadership obviously change, but our leadership within the Department of Children and Families may also change. They are our key partners, and so we want to make sure to protect the work that we're doing, particularly since the data is showing us that it's working. And so we have drafted legislation. We've secured a primary sponsor on the Senate side and are working on securing a sponsor on the Assembly side, and are hoping that this legislation actually might be introduced next week. And it will not only define the PSB program, but also secure the funding attached to the program. And that's all I have. So I'm happy to take any comments, questions that y'all have. And Valeria is here too. If you have any data questions, she'll back me up. Hi, Genevieve.
Yeah, hi. I have a few questions that I'm hoping to get some clarity around. So when it comes to the PSB CBT, that the therapists are engaging in, I know it's group-based, but I'm curious how you were able to handle the barriers of family involvement, because I know that the research says family involvement is the key factor to minimizing the behaviors. And at the same time, we know these are like chronically distressed families. And so we have clients come into our clinic where, you know, there are multiple ruptures in regards to where they're living, or parents aren't able to engage in the ways that we would really want to see them engage if we were doing a like group only model. So how did you guys address that barrier, as well as increasing the amount of clinicians who want to work with this population?
So I'm not in the provider end, but I have sat in on the trainings, and I am a psychologist by training. So the model is preferably group. They do also train on the family model. So if you get trained in group and you meet fidelity for group, meaning you did all that you had to do to effectively serve these families, you can also do individual. So there are cases in which, you know, for all the reasons you mentioned and more, where this kid for their particular circumstance might need to be in the family model, which means individual therapy. In terms of caregivers, are always, so they've been really flexible, but there always has to be some adult involved. Sometimes that's getting the resource, we call it resource families in New Jersey, foster families, probably, you know, in Oregon. So sometimes it's the foster family that's involved, and we just really work with the providers work with them to really get them on board to understand why it's critical for them to be involved. I've heard of cases in which they even had their DCP, their Child Protective Services worker, serve as that adult. So I think that they just have gotten really creative because it's critical for an adult who is providing any kind of support or care to this youth to be involved in the process. You know, for all of us who are clinicians, we know that 45 minutes a week in therapy is not going to solve everything, right? You know, we really do need the caregivers to be involved so that they can be generalizing also the skills that they're learning at home, you know, or wherever it is that they're residing. And then in terms of getting clinicians interested, it hasn't been a problem for us so far. I mean, again, remembering that we started with 2 in the state of New Jersey, so we had a lot of clinicians to choose from, and so far we've had enough interest for clinicians wanting to do this work. I think, you know, a lot of it probably has to do with the fact that, you know, we have been doing a lot of education and helping clinicians understand that these are just kids, right? They are kids who are engaging in a behavior that is absolutely changeable. Right? So we communicate the message that this is absolutely serious, but you know, there is hope. They can heal. The research shows us that when they participate in treatment, they do well. And not only with regard to not engaging in problematic sexual behaviors again, but also with regard to decreased anxiety, decreased depression, improved communication skills with their you know, improve communication skills in general, improve parent-child relationships, and just improve general coping and functioning, right? Because they're learning skills that are meant to help them manage these behaviors, but those skills are really generalizable. And so it really helps across the spectrum with functioning for these youth. And so when we talk about these kids as kids, and we talk about kids engaging in PSB and kids impacted by PSB, and we don't talk about sex offenders and perpetrators and pedophiles, and, you know, it really changes the conversation. And helps all of us reframe. So I think, you know, all of our providers, even before being asked to participate in training, have been in training for the model, have been trained in PSB and in what we're doing. And so maybe that's helped shift some people who otherwise didn't think they want to work with this population to understand that it's a good population to work with. And it's, I mean, in how many treatment models do we all do, or, you know, working with families, that we can say that 97 out of our 100 kids that we just work with are not going to do X behavior again, right? It's really effective. It's very successful, you know, and it really makes a huge impact.
And is that initial education and information to clinicians in like the field, is that happening early on, like in grad school? Is that happening when they are at mental health agencies? We're
No,
just trying to figure out, because we've had some challenges in Oregon, like getting clinicians to work with these like higher needs, higher liability kind of clients. Because I think that's how they're viewed, right? Is like high needs, high trauma, high liability. And so yeah, I'm just curious about the education piece.
You know, I'm not sure what's happening in grad school. I mean, so when I'm talking about education, I'm saying that we are providing that education, and we open our so our trainings are open to everyone. And so when we did the PSB CBT, we did a 2.5-hour training on understanding and serving children with PSB, and another one on understanding and serving adolescents with PSB that Oklahoma did for us. Right. Well, even when we were in the start of this model creating this framework. So we knew early on we needed to start bringing the language and the communication to our people early on. And so a couple of years ago, we started doing training just in general on understanding these kids. What we're getting in grad school, you know, I don't know. I'm on a work group with the National Children's Alliance that's looking at how do we increase our mental health workforce for working with traumatized children in general. And that's one of the things that we've been trying to assess is, are people getting this education in grad school? And I think largely what we're hearing is no. I know I didn't, but you know, I went, you know, over 20 years ago. But you know, I think we also have, like, as I mentioned, a lot of community-based organizations in New Jersey. We have a children's system of care in New Jersey. So every kid who has behavioral health or emotional health needs, or who are involved or who have developmental disabilities, have access to treatment regardless of their ability to have insurance. So it's a Medicaid funded program. And so every kid has access. And so the clinicians who are working with these kids are automatically getting exposed to kids with, you know, to trauma. And as a result of that, are recognizing they don't have the skills to work with youth who have trauma. And so then they're getting the training, right? And so they're probably learning more backwards than we like, right? We'd like them to get that education in graduate school and then be prepared to work with these families. And I'm sure what they're finding is their first jobs out of grad school is, you know, being what we call intensive and community clinicians, And these are high-risk families, and they're like, oh my goodness, what I learned in grad school did not prepare me for this. And so then they're coming to us or to whomever else for training and education.
Awesome, thank you. And my
You're
last
welcome.
maybe question is, what is the name of the program that New Jersey has treating PSP?
We just call it the PSP program.
Okay.
It's the PSP program. Yeah. So for the state. Now, each individual agency might call their program something else. Right. So
Gotcha.
the providers themselves are, you know, whatever community mental health agency name that they have.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Nadia. So we have a couple questions in the chat. One was during the presentation by Darian, and she asked who created the trainings and where were they sent for that? I think that was
It depends on what training if you're talking about the evidence-based treatment for treatment models, that's through Oklahoma. So it depends. The PSB CBT that I mentioned, problematic sexual behavior, cognitive behavioral therapy, is through University of Oklahoma. We are trying to, so there's a model or there's a process whereby we can get our own in-state trainers to be able to train our own people. It's a very lengthy process, so they have to finish the entire training themselves. Then they have to become within agency trainers so they can train their own clinicians within their agencies, and then they can become statewide trainers. So that's the path that we're hoping to get on. We have one person who is doing within agency training, and we're hoping to bring her on to be able to do statewide training, but this model requires more than one trainer. So our ultimate goal is to have our own trainers within state who can continue to build the capacity for working with these youth. With regard to just general training for our specialized care coordinators, our communities, you know, we're either bringing in specialists from Oklahoma or from, you know, other agencies that have a specialization. We're creating training and doing training for our SCCs. It really varies. TFCBT PSB, so that's trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy for problematic sexual behaviors. There's a model that's pretty accessible. I don't know about it. Is Oregon are a lot of you trained in TFCBT? Regular TFCBT is not. It's not. Okay, so it's a pretty accessible model these days because it's pretty popular and well known throughout the country. Now it's even offered virtually. You can be trained virtually in TFCBT. It does have a consultation call component, so it's a collaborative. So you'd have to, you know, present cases and do these things to make sure that you have the support that you need to learn how to carry out the model effectively. And then once you, and I think the TFCBT training is maybe 6 months. That's including the consultation calls, but you can begin to see cases as soon as you go through the first set of trainings. So you can pretty quickly start to see cases. And once you get trained in TFCBT, doing the PSB component is, again, just another virtual training you participate in. And then you go through consultation calls for this, the same support to help you with, responding to these cases and managing these cases. And then once you finish that, you can then see kids who have TFC, who meet criteria. TFCBT PSB, though, is only for school-aged kids. And it's for kids who have both PTSD symptoms due to their own traumas and are engaging in problematic sexual behaviors. What we do know anyway is that most kids who engage in PSB have some kind of trauma, right? We know it's not necessarily sexual abuse, right? In fact, domestic violence is much more correlated with PSB, but a portion of them do have their own history of sexual abuse. They may be involved in situations in which is interpersonal violence in the home or other kinds of domestic violence, and they might be exposed to inappropriate sexual content on social media, on the internet, and all those sorts of things. So those are all traumas too. And so if they have some PTSD symptoms related to that trauma and are engaging in PSB, they could participate in TFCBT PSB. Sorry for the alphabet soup. So did I answer your question, Darian? I know all the acronyms. Okay.
If Darian has a follow-up, please let us know. The next question in the chat was from Justine, and she was interested in hearing more about the timeline of this process.
So in late 2021 is when we decided to convene a work group. And then in February of 22, we had our first meeting. By January, February of 23, we had started to write up that document that you saw. And then it was published sometime in the early spring of 2023. The framework was published. So it was about 14 months of very regular, like I said, we met every 4 to 6 weeks for scheduled meetings, and we had lots of meetings in between to do that process. And so then that came out, the framework came out, we got the funding to hire the specialized care coordinators in 2023. By March of 2020, so we started doing all the training clinicians, training communities, training, talking to whomever would listen to us about this. And then in March of 2024, we rolled out the new referral process. So that's when the team at the hotline started to, when they screened out cases, we're connecting those cases directly to our specialized care coordinators. By June of 2024, all the entire state had coverage for the SECs. So when we started in March of 2024, maybe 9 of our 15 care management organization teams were on board. By June, all 15 were on board. So that was full coverage of the state. And so we've been, it's been fully implemented since June of 2024. So we're finalizing our first little annual report in the coming weeks to kind of see sort of a snapshot of what the data looks like. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Yes, thank you. That was the first question. And then the other piece was just curious about the money side of things. And I don't know if you've got info in front of you, but just curious about like the money that DCF is putting in and like how much has that been like on a yearly basis?
Yeah, so the specialized care coordinator positions are about $2.2 million. And that covers 21 specialized care coordinators. We have 21 counties. And then they have supervisors within their agencies. There's a little bit of funding. They get about, I think, so after our first 6 months, we realized one of the barriers to accessing services was language issues and transportation. And so we advocated for DCF to give the specialized care coordinators a little bit of funding, what we call flex funds, to be able to cover some of those services. So they got maybe an extra $15,000 per county to do that. The Child Treatment Assistance Fund is $5 million. So that covers all the medical and mental health services for all of these youth. We are nowhere near spending that much at all, right? So it'll be a while before we, are spending $5 million for actual services. Our contracts, so we have MOUs with all the provider agencies that do the medical and mental health services, and we do our contract rates based on what our Department of Children and Families does for their contracts. So we use the same reimbursement rates with them. And then we also have another like 600,000 or so to cover program staff and training. What we're asking for with our legislation is it's $8.5 million. So we asked, we realized we need to hire another person to help with some of this service coordination. There's some other, pieces that I think we need after our first year in terms of staff to help support the program. And so the legislation is asking for an allocation of 8.5 million. And 5 million of that designated just for direct service. Any other questions?
Yeah, curious about how many kids have been served so far, if you have some of that data point or like a per year or something like that.
Valeria, that's all you.
You're a data person. Beautiful. Thanks.
So, kids that have been actually serviced, either through a medical evaluation or mental health treatment service in the first year is 150 kids and their families as well if they attended the group sessions. And those are with the providers that have MOUs with us. Many of the kids were referred to other community providers. So there are more kids that were connected to services, but in terms of the kids that were serviced through the Child Treatment Assistance Fund. That's 150 kids in the first year.
The other important piece is that in addition to the 150 kids, I think it was about 600 kids, 600 families in total that the SECs made contact with in their first year. So even if they didn't, participate in these medical and mental health services, they at least were provided with psychoeducation, with appropriate language on how to communicate about this issue, about information regarding safety planning, and information about how to get resources. What we're learning is that many of our kids, as someone already mentioned earlier, I think it was you, Genevieve, these kids have complex issues. And so not surprisingly, they come to us, they're already involved in services, right? So adding yet another service to their plate is a lot. So many of our kids who are not engaging in these specialized services are already involved in services. So one of our again, we're learning from the data. One of the things that we're now looking at is providing more education to to agencies who are serving kids in general and saying, hey, great, you're doing A, B, and C work, but when these kids come to you and they have the option to be able to engage in specialized services, let's figure out how you can collaborate with those clinicians so that they can do both, right? So there's that piece, and then there's the piece of what's the other piece? So one is that, and then helping our SECs better communicate why specialized services are important to these families so that they can, recognize the need to do this and still have those. They're not going to lose those other supports, but let's figure out a way that we can't, we're not going to make it onerous for you, but you can get the services that you need. So you're not back again coming to us for services, or now you have no choice because now you have charges and we need to make sure that you're engaged in services. Good question. Thanks. Anything else? I'm going to put my email in the chat. Of course, you're always welcome to, if something else pops up after we've spoken, and you need to ask a question or chat, you can reach out to me and I'll either connect you with Valeria and Mip if that's who you need to speak to, or, directly answer your question.
One other quick question from Debbie, who's in the room with me. Curious about the, if you all are able to share like the draft of the legislation, or like as you all are moving forward with that piece. I think as our committee's in the place of starting to get more concrete, that would be helpful if you're willing or able to share that.
Yeah, the legislation I think might be introduced next week, so I'll be able to share the legislation. I mean, of course, even though it's still technically in draft mode, right? It can still be edited and in process. So I can share that with you once it's introduced, I think next week.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
And I saw about the PowerPoint. Absolutely. I'll send over the PowerPoint.
Great. Thank you. I was
You're
just gonna
welcome.
uplift that. We appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, well, I don't see any other questions that came through, and we are at time. Shannon, you're about to.
No, I was just going to say thank you so much. This was really helpful and a really rich conversation. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes,
You're
thank
welcome.
you.
Well, good luck. I mean, you guys are amazing for looking at this, and it's really, again, you're really thoughtful way. You're all really collaborating on this and thinking through the best way to serve these kids. So, kudos to you all for taking the time and energy to try to figure out what's right for you all. And we're happy to answer any questions or provide any support throughout your journeys. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone. We will, work groups are meeting this month, but we will see you all in early June. And work group leads, I'm going to schedule a time. I got to send another doodle. The magic didn't happen the first time. We got to try again. So thank you all. Take care.